I took the job because I needed 3,000 pesos by Friday. That's it. That's the whole origin story. No mysterious calling, no sense that something was pulling me toward that address. I just needed rent money, and my roommate Dodong had already spotted me twice this month and was starting to give me that look. The one that's not angry yet, but is getting there. The one that means the third time he spots me, he'll start being weird about it. And once your roommate starts being weird about money, things get uncomfortable fast in a 16 square meter room you share with another person. So when the posting appeared on the corkboard outside the university registrar actual paper, printed in courier font like it was typed on something from before I was born, I photographed it with my phone and stared at it for about 40 seconds before I texted the number. Night logging clerk, 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Daily rate, 800 pesos. Must be punctual. Must follow instructions. No phone use during shift. Serious inquiries only. 800 a night. 4 nights covered Friday's problem and left me with change for a proper meal. I didn't ask what logging meant in this context. I assumed it was data entry of some kind. Manila is full of third shift office work for students, call centers, back office operations, medical transcription. The posting had a landline number, which should have been my first question, but I didn't ask that either. The woman who answered sounded like she was already bored with me before I said anything. She asked if I was a student. I told her yes. She asked if I had experience with record keeping. I said I'd been a secretary for our college organization, which was true, though I mostly just sent emails and lost the minutes. She made a sound that suggested that was acceptable. She gave me an address on Calle Dolor in Binondo, told me to arrive no later than 10:50, and said to bring a ballpoint pen. Black ink, not blue. And come alone, she said. No friends. I almost made a joke about that, but something in her voice made me not to. You should know what Binondo is like at 11 at night in July, during the rains. It's wet in a specific way. Not the dramatic rain of storm footage, but the constant, exhausted drizzle that Manila does for weeks at a time. It is the kind that doesn't quite justify an umbrella, but soaks you completely anyway. The streets in that part of the district are old. The buildings pressed together like they're keeping each other upright. The streetlights are the orange sodium kind that make everyone look slightly ill. Half of them are out. The ones that work flicker in a way that might be electrical problems. Or it might just be the way they always are, and you only notice at night. I got off the jeepney 2 streets over because Calle Dolor didn't appear on my Maps app. It just wasn't there. I walked around the block 3 times, thinking I was turned around. I kept checking the compass on my phone. Finally, a Manong selling cigarettes from a folding table pointed me down a gap between 2 shop houses that I had walked past twice without seeing. It was not hidden exactly, just not where your eye wanted to go. The street was about 4 meters wide, enough for one vehicle if it was careful. Old stone on either side was patched with mismatched concrete, the seams between them dark with decades of weather. It smelled like the inside of a church. Incense, old wood, and something underneath those things. Something damp and heavy that I don't have a cleaner word for. The building at the end was 3 stories, and the middle one was wider than its neighbors. It looked colonial with high windows, painted a pale yellow that had faded to the color of old paper, with the wooden shutters on the upper floors all closed. There was no sign on the exterior. There was a single bulb above the ground floor entrance, behind a wire cage, burning steady and orange. Below the bulb was a window, not a door. A window, the kind you see in old banks or government buildings, with a low counter and a metal grate. The window was open. Behind the grate was a woman sitting at a desk, and she was looking directly at me as I came down the street. She looked at me the way you look at someone you've been expecting for a specific amount of time. She was older, maybe 60, maybe more, in a dark-colored blouse, with her hair pulled back tight and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Her desk had an old gooseneck lamp that put a hard circle of yellow on the counter in front of her and left the rest of her in shadow. Behind her I could see shelves from floor to ceiling on both sides. On the shelves were ledger books. They were the kind with the marbled cardboard covers. There were so many that the shelving sagged gently in the middle under the weight of them. "You're the applicant," she said, not as a question. "Yes, ma'am." Then she stood. She was shorter than I expected and unlocked a door to the left of the window that I hadn't noticed and told me to come in. The room behind the window was small. It had the desk, 2 chairs, the shelves, a door at the back, and a standing fan in the corner that clicked on each rotation. On the desk was the gooseneck lamp, a cup with pens in it, a black ballpoint pen laid separately on top of a piece of paper like it was waiting for a signature, and an open ledger book, one of the marbled cover ones from the shelves. She sat back down and I stood at the side of the desk because there was no obvious place for me to be. She talked for maybe 15 minutes. I'm going to tell you what she told me, and you will notice, thinking about it afterward, that she told me nothing. Not actually. She used words that made sense individually and formed sentences that were grammatically complete, and I understood each sentence the moment she said it. Yet, when I try to recall the explanation now, I find that I retained almost nothing except the rules. Something about the building being an administrative processing center. Something about clients arriving through the night who needed to be received and logged. Something about the ledger being the core record, and accuracy being paramount. She said the work was simple and repetitive. She said most nights were quiet. She said I needed to stay at the window until 5 in the morning without exception, and that someone would arrive at 5 to relieve me. Her instructions were explicit. First, do not leave the window unattended. Next, do not look directly at clients who appear distressed. Simply complete the entry, hand them the slip, and wait for them to leave. I was warned never to take anything from this room when my shift ends, not even a pen. Furthermore, if someone gives a name that is already in the ledger, with the same spelling and same family name, I was to log it anyway, without mentioning the duplication. She noted that the mirrors in the back room are covered, and must not be uncovered. I was told not to sweep the floor. If something falls, leave it. There is a small refrigerator in the back with rice and water where I may eat, but I must not bring outside food in, nor take any food out. Finally, if it gets very slow between 3 and 4, and I begin to feel sleepy, I must not sleep. Then she pushed the separate pen toward me, the one on top of the paper, and told me to sign my name and put my ID number from my university ID. I signed. I didn't read the paper first. I know. She showed me the ledger format. A date column, a time column, a name column, an address column, and a final column she called the referral column, which she said clients would fill in themselves. Each entry got a number stamp from a small hand numbering machine on the right side of the desk. She demonstrated, pressing it once so it advanced by 1. The current number on the stamp when I looked at it was 4,411,089. 4 million. I thought it was a display number, like an odometer reset. I thought the machine started at some arbitrary number for tracking purposes. I didn't think about it long. She showed me the stack of small numbered slips on the left side of the desk, pre-printed, the size of a raffle ticket. I was to give one to each client after completing their entry. The number on the slip should match the stamp number. At 10:59, she put on her jacket and picked up a small black bag from under the desk. First client usually arrives before 11:10, she said. After that, they come on their own schedule. How many on a typical night? I asked. She was already at the back door. She paused with her hand on the knob. It varies, she said. You'll find a pace. And then she left. I heard a door close somewhere further back in the building. It was not the exterior door, but a door somewhere deeper inside. And then I was alone in the small room with the gooseneck lamp, the clicking fan, the open ledger in front of me, and my new ballpoint pen. I checked my phone. It was 11:03. There was no signal, which was strange for Binondo because the reception is usually fine. I had Wi-Fi listed, but it wouldn't connect to anything. The battery was at 60%. I sat down in the chair that was clearly the one I was supposed to use. It was higher, positioned on the window side of the desk, and I looked out through the grate at the wet street. The orange bulb burned above me. The rain fell through its cone of light. I watched the dark gap at the end of the street where Calle Dolor joined the wider road. I thought to myself, 800 pesos. I'm already here. Just 4 more hours and 57 minutes left. At 11:08, the first person came. I want to describe him carefully because I've spent a lot of time since then trying to make sense of it, and the description is the only part I can pin down clearly. He was a man, older, maybe 70, wearing a barong Tagalog that was completely dry despite the rain outside. He was thin in the way people get when they've been thin for a long time. It was not a sick kind of thinness, but just the thinness of old age and a life without excess. He stood at the window without stepping under the overhang first. He was just suddenly there at the window, the way you're suddenly aware of someone who walked up while you were looking down. He didn't say anything. He looked at me through the grate with an expression that I can only describe as waiting. It was the specific kind of waiting that doesn't expect to be surprised by whatever comes next. "Good evening," I said. "Please state your name and address for the record." That was the exact phrasing the woman had told me to use. It came out of my mouth automatically. He nodded like this was familiar to him and gave his name. It was a full name with 3 parts, which I won't repeat here, and an address in Tondo on a street I recognized. I wrote it in the columns. His handwriting, when he filled in the referral column, was careful and small. I couldn't read the name he wrote there without obviously leaning over, which felt rude. I stamped his entry. I advanced the number, tore off a slip, and passed it through the slot at the bottom of the grate. He took it with both hands. He looked at the number, folded it once precisely, and put it in the breast pocket of his barong. "Thank you," he said in English. Then he walked away down the street. I watched him go. He turned left at the end of Calle Dolor and disappeared into the orange-lit distance. I thought to myself that maybe it was a social services program or elderly residents registering for something. The second person arrived at 11:20. It was a middle-aged woman wearing a dress that looked like she'd been somewhere much nicer than this street tonight. The third arrived at 11:31. It was a teenage boy with his school bag still on his back. It seemed wrong for this hour, but Manila does strange things with school schedules, and I didn't ask. By midnight, I had logged 9 entries. They came at irregular intervals, sometimes clustered together, sometimes with a gap of 20 minutes. They all knew the format perfectly. Name, address, referral. They all waited without impatience. They all took the slip with both hands. The thing I noticed before I let myself fully notice it was that none of them were wet. It was raining. It was not raining heavily, but it was constant. Calle Dolor was maybe 30 meters from the main road. They should have had some rain on their shoes at least, or on the shoulders of their clothes. The old man in the barong. I'd tracked his approach, and he walked under the open sky for at least 10 meters before reaching the overhang. He was dry. All of them were completely, totally dry. I didn't write that down. I simply noted it. The way your brain flags something without fully raising the alarm, and then I logged the next entry because another person was standing at the window. Around 1 in the morning, during a gap between clients, I ate the rice from the small refrigerator in the back room. It was cold rice with no yulum, which is a very specific kind of sad that I knew well by that point in the semester. I ate standing up because while the back room had a plastic chair, it also held those 2 covered mirrors. They were full-length mirrors, pushed against opposite walls with cloth over them. The cloth was old and slightly yellowed, and I didn't want to sit between them. I don't know why. I just didn't. I thought about the rules while I ate. Don't leave the window unattended, fine, standard shift work. Don't look directly at distressed clients. Odd phrasing. Distressed how? Crying? And angry. It felt like a customer service note. I'd had enough customer service experience from my 1 semester at the call center to understand the logic of not escalating a situation. Don't take anything out of the room, also fine. I'd worked a job at a university supply office where the same rule applied. Pens go missing, it's just human nature, so you don't enable it. The mirrors, though. Covered mirrors are a specific thing in Filipino tradition. They are covered when someone dies in the house. I don't know the full explanation behind it. It is something about not wanting the soul of the dead to get trapped or turned around by its own reflection. Or it is something about the living not wanting to be seen or noticed by what is left in the room. My grandmother covered the mirrors when my grandfather died. I remember being 11 and thinking it was pure superstition. Then, I remember being alone in my grandfather's house after the others went to cook. I stood in front of a covered mirror and felt, in a way I have never successfully explained, that the cloth was doing something useful. I was covering mirrors in a back office, in a building where people came at night, in a building that didn't appear on maps. I stood in the back room with cold rice and thought, huh. Then someone appeared at the window, and I went back to the desk. The pace found itself, just like she had said. I stopped watching the clock every 10 minutes and started just working. Look up, greet, record name, record address, wait for the referral column, stamp, number, slip, both hands taking it, thank you, next. There is a rhythm to repetitive work that your body learns faster than your brain does, and by 2 in the morning I had settled into it completely. The clients were all ages. There were even a few children, which bothered me in a background way because children alone at 2 in the morning in Binondo is wrong. But they weren't distressed. They moved with the same unhurried purpose as the adults. Some of them had adults nearby who weren't quite with them, not holding hands or speaking to them, just present in the vicinity. I decided this was a family service of some kind, and adults were accompanying minors, so I was logging the minors separately for record purposes. I am explaining, I know. I was explaining to myself in real time. The referral column. I hadn't looked at one closely because leaning over to read it felt intrusive, and because I was busy, and because there was always another person immediately after the last one. But around 2:15, there was a 20-minute gap, the longest so far, and I looked back at recent entries. The referral column asked for a name. That was all. There was no label, just a blank field in the ruled ledger. People were writing names. Full names mostly, in the same careful handwriting they used for their own entries. Occasionally, they wrote an address alongside the name as if for clarity. I understood it, looking at those names, the way you understand something that was already true before you understood it. The names in the referral column were the people who had sent them here, the people they had come because of, clients who had arrived earlier tonight, or in earlier ledger books, or... I reached for the thought and stopped reaching. I stamped the next entry, tore the next slip, and waited. At 3:17, I noticed the smell. It had been there the whole time, I think. The church smell I noticed coming in incense and old wood and the thing underneath. But at 3:17, the underneath thing became, very briefly, the primary thing, and I identified it, Kaminyang. White incense resin, the kind you burn at wakes. It was sharp and sweet and heavy, the exact smell of my grandfather's lamé in my grandmother's sala. It was the smell of every visita iglesia and funeral mass I had ever attended in my whole life. I looked at my phone. The battery was at 31%. There was still no signal. I thought about the rule, do not leave the window unattended. Lamé, you don't leave. You don't leave, somebody is always there. My grandmother's house had rotated people in shifts for 3 days. Aunts, cousins, neighbors, people I didn't know who had known my grandfather in ways I hadn't known. The one constant was that the sala was never empty, that my grandfather was never alone in those 3 days before they took him to the church. You didn't leave because the dead shouldn't be alone. That was the rule. That was the old rule, the one lying underneath the rule she had given me. I was not going to think about what that meant for what I was keeping company with. I stamped the next entry. At 4:04, I reached the bottom of the current page of the ledger and turned to the next. The next page wasn't blank. It was filled in already, in the same format, date, time, name, address, and referral. The date at the top of the filled entries was tonight's date. The times ran from around 5:30 in the morning, 6 hours from now, onward. I turned another page. It was the same. Filled in, tonight, tracking times I hadn't even reached yet. I turned pages for maybe 30 seconds, not breathing quite right. The entries went on and on. Tomorrow's date. The day after. Date 6 months from now, still written in the ledger's ordered columns, already completely filled. I flipped near the end of the book and found entries dated. I did the math, I counted, 2 years from now. Still filled. Still neat. I put the ledger back where it belonged, opened to the correct current page, and I stamped the next entry and handed the next slip through the slot. I watched the next person take it with both hands and walk away down the wet street. At 4:19, the Kaminyang smell came back stronger. With it, I noticed that the ledger had far more pages behind the current section than in front of it. It was many more, the book appearing much thicker on the right side than I remembered it being when I started, though I couldn't have told you when that change happened. The ledger had no last page. I didn't check. I didn't turn to the absolute end, but I knew it the way you know things at 4 in the morning when you're tired and your logical protections are thinner. The entries went on forever. The book accommodated them. I was a night clerk at a window. I wrote names. I handed out numbered slips. People came to me in the dark, and I processed them one by one, and the machine moved on. 4,400,000 and something. Since when? Since whoever sat in this chair before me, and before them, and before this building had a window at all, and before Binondo had Spanish street names, and before anyone called this place Manila. An interchangeable part. Replaceable. Already replaced. At 4:41, 19 minutes before 5, 19 minutes before someone came to relieve me, and I could leave and go straight home. Pag, don't stop. Go straight home. Take nothing with you. I was reviewing entries in a gap between clients. It was the way you review your work without really seeing it, and my pen was tracking down the name column out of a tired habit of checking for legibility. I saw my grandmother's name. Full name. 3 parts. Her maiden name and her married name, exactly as I'd seen them on the envelopes of letters she wrote my mother. It was exactly as I'd read them on the frame of her funeral portrait 6 years ago at her own LeMay, where the sala smelled like Camagnon, and someone was always sitting with her so she wasn't alone. Time of entry, 4:53 a.m. I looked at the clock on my phone. It was 4:41. 12 minutes left. The referral column, written in careful handwriting that was not mine, a name I recognized as belonging to no one who was dead. My name. I am telling you this from after. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you this at night in my room, at my desk, with Dodon already asleep in the other bed, and I have been fine, I think the word is. Since that night, I went home at 5:02 when the woman came back without a word and sat at the desk, and I left. I went straight home. I took nothing. I didn't stop for food or for the text messages I'd missed. I went straight to the room. I got into bed with my shoes still on, and I lay there until the sun came up. I am fine. I am telling you this. There's a thing my grandmother used to say. She said it when someone was very sick, someone standing right on the edge of something. She said it quietly, not to them, but to the air in the room. Me sumasabe na. Someone is coming along with them. I didn't look back at the ledger after I saw my name. I don't know if there were more entries after 4:53. I don't know who was written in the referral column beside my name. I told myself I simply misread it, that the handwriting was similar to mine, but wasn't mine. I've been telling myself that for the days since. The thing is, I need the money. The Friday problem is still a Friday problem. 800 pesos a night is still 800 pesos a night. The posting is still hanging on the corkboard outside the registrar. My phone has the number saved.